In the heart of Igara town lived a man named Femi, a humble food seller in the main market. Every morning, before the sun rose, Femi would lift heavy bags of garri, rice and beans, and the smell of dust, pepper and oil followed him daily. But he didn't complain. He worked hard, believing that with patience and love, life would become better. His wife Sandra was the kind of woman that turned heads anywhere she went. Her beauty was sharp, her nails long and shiny, her hair was always neat, her lashes coiled like butterfly wings. Femi adored her. He gave her everything he could, even when it meant going to bed hungry. But Sandra was not satisfied. At first, she pretended to love the simple life, eating beans and plantain, laughing with Femi under their dim lights, and walking to the market together. But soon, her laughter disappeared. She began to complain about everything: the heat, the smell of the market, the small house, and even the little food they ate. She would look at Femi, sad and unhappy, wishing she had more. She wanted a man who wore expensive clothes, a man who would drive her around and fill her wallet with money. Even though Femi was trying his best, she started saying he wasn't on her level anymore. He would wake up early, sweating and struggling just to bring home small money for food. But when he got home, Sandra's face would twist in disappointment. She stopped cooking, she stopped cleaning, and she stopped caring. While Femi was at the market, Sandra would stay home, painting her nails, fixing lashes, and taking pictures for social media. When evening came, she would not even ask if her husband had eaten. Some nights, she would walk out of the house in a shiny dress, saying she was going to hang out with her friends. Her friends, Rita and Blessing, were her biggest influence. They were loud, flashy women who believed life was all about fun. They wore wigs that touched their backs, sprayed perfume like water, and always carried phones to take pictures in front of cars that didn't belong to them. They would laugh at Sandra for living with a market man, and soon Sandra started to believe them. Femi noticed his wife changing, but he kept loving her. Sometimes he would come home with her favorite food or a gift just to see her smile. But Sandra no longer cared. She wanted more money, more attention, and more luxury. She would sit on the couch and tell Femi to cook for himself. On some nights, she didn't even come home. Still, he didn't complain. He didn't fight. He prayed quietly that one day she would realize how much he loves her. Sandra's heart was already far away. She no longer saw the man she loved. She saw a man who wasn't rich enough to make her shine. The neighbors began to whisper. Femi, who used to walk with his wife hand in hand, now walked alone. His face became pale, his eyes tired and weak. He worked harder than before, hoping money would make her stay. But money could not buy humility. And so, the home that once smelled of food and laughter began to smell of perfume and silence. Femi didn't know it yet, but the woman he loved was slowly slipping away, not because of hunger or hardship, but because of greed. Weeks turned into months, and the distance between Femi and Sandra grew wider. The home that once echoed with laughter had now become a house of silence. Femi tried everything to keep his marriage alive. He worked longer hours at the market, hoping that a little more money would make her happy. He came home late, covered in dust and sweat, but with small gifts in his hands: a wrapper, a pair of sandals, or a plate of her favorite rice and stew. But Sandra no longer saw those things as love. She saw them as pity. To her, Femi's hard work was not enough. She wanted a life that looked rich on the outside, even if it was empty inside. Every day, she would stand in front of the mirror, admiring herself, while Femi struggled to save every naira to pay rent and buy food. Her friends kept feeding her pride. They told her she was too beautiful to suffer and too fine to live with a market man. They showed her pictures of women being taken on trips, buying wigs worth millions of naira, and wearing clothes that shone under camera lights. Sandra's heart began to drift further away from the man who once made her smile. She started staying out late. Sometimes she wouldn't come home for 2 to 3 days. She said she was visiting friends, but Femi knew the truth. She was spending time in clubs and dancing under flashy lights while her husband was heartbroken at home. The little respect she had for him disappeared completely. She stopped wearing a wedding ring and avoided being seen with him in public. When people asked about her husband, she would roll her eyes, embarrassed to admit that the man selling beans in the market was her husband. Still, Femi never raised his voice. He stayed calm. Even when pain filled his eyes, he believed marriage was sacred and didn't want to lose the woman he had promised to love forever. But the weight of rejection was slowly crushing him. He began to lose focus at work. Customers noticed that his once cheerful greetings had become faint. He barely smiled anymore. Some days, he would forget to eat. At night, he would sit on the edge of his bed, staring at the door, waiting for his wife who no longer cared to return. One particular week, Sandra spent 5 days away from home. Femi cooked for himself, washed his clothes, and even cleaned the house, all in silence. When she finally returned, she looked expensive. New hair, new nails, a shiny bag, and her perfume filled the air as she walked past him without a word. Femi's heart broke in ways words couldn't describe. It wasn't just about the late nights or the disrespect. It was the way she looked at him, as if he was nothing. The neighbors started talking openly. They pitied Femi. Some advised him to send her away, but he couldn't. He still hoped she would change. He still remembered the woman he married, the one who once smiled beside him while he sold in the market. But that woman was gone. Sandra had become someone else, a woman driven by greed and who believed that money meant love. Each day, Femi grew weaker, his heart heavy with pain. He had given her everything, his love, his sweat, his patience, yet it wasn't enough. And deep down, a quiet fear began to grow inside him. The fear that one day she would completely leave him and never look back. And though he didn't know yet, that day was much closer than he thought. By the time another month passed, the tension in Femi's home had become unbearable. The love that once brought peace now felt like a heavy weight on his heart. Every day, he returned from the market exhausted, hoping to find comfort, but instead, he met cold silence and the smell of expensive perfume. Sandra had fully changed. She no longer acted like a wife, but like a stranger living in his house. She woke up late, spent hours dressing up, and left home before the evening. She didn't tell Femi where she was going anymore. Sometimes she came back the next morning, her face bright with makeup and her phone full of pictures from parties. Her friends Rita and Blessing had become her closest family. They convinced her that living with a poor man was a waste. Every visit from them pushed her further away from Femi's love. Femi noticed everything. He saw the changes in her eyes, her tone, her attitude, yet he refused to fight her. He worked harder, carrying heavier loads at the market, trying to earn enough to make her happy. But no matter what he brought home, Sandra acted unimpressed. She wanted luxury. She wanted to live like the women she saw on her phone. She wanted a man who could buy her everything without questions. Femi's heart began to fade with each cold look, each night she left him alone. Yet he stayed, not because he was weak, but because he truly loved her. He believed love was patient. He believed love could heal even the coldest hearts. One evening, as the sky turned red and the market was closing, Femi sat quietly in his shop and cried. He wept not because he was tired or hungry, but because he realized that no matter how much love he gave, Sandra's heart had already left him. The man who once smiled easily had become a shadow of himself. His business began to suffer. His once lively customers now saw a man who walked silently, his eyes full of pain. He was living, but not alive. Meanwhile, Sandra found new excitements. She started spending more time with a man named Toby, one of Rita's flashy friends who loved showing off his wealth. Toby had a car, wore shiny watches, and spoke with confidence. Sandra was drawn to him immediately. He treated her like a queen, giving her gifts and attention. Soon, she began comparing him to Femi. She convinced herself that Toby was the kind of man she deserved. She told herself she had wasted her youth living with a poor man who would never change. Each time she saw Toby, her hatred for Femi grew. She started avoiding home completely, using lies to cover her absence. When she was around, she barely looked at him. The once peaceful home had now turned into a house of silence and sadness. Femi cried day and night. His tears became his companion. Each night, he prayed for a miracle, that Sandra would wake up and remember their love, that she would realize how much he had sacrificed. But day by day, she drifted further away. And then came the day everything broke. Sandra returned home late one night, her eyes red from partying, her phone in her hand as she smiled at Toby's messages. Femi sat quietly in the corner, watching her but said nothing. That night, something inside him died completely. He realized he had lost her not to death but to greed and pride. Time passed and Sandra's decision became final. Her heart had fully left Femi and pulled towards the luxury and promises of Toby. She no longer hesitated. She no longer felt guilty. One morning, she packed her things quietly, leaving behind the life they once shared. Before leaving, Toby convinced her to involve her family. He told her to ask them to return Femi's bride price. Sandra, blinded by pride and luxury, obeyed. When Femi received the news that her bride price will be returned, a wave of frustration and sorrow hit him. Years of love, patience, and sacrifice had vanished in a moment of greed. Yet he did not scream nor curse. He took the money quietly, feeling the weight of betrayal. Sandra moved into Toby's house immediately. His home was big, shiny, and full of everything she had dreamt of. For a moment, it seemed her dreams were fulfilled. She thought her happiness was guaranteed and that Femi would remain a poor distant memory. But life had other plans. Femi retreated into his work. Though his heart was broken, he stayed honest, diligent, and strong. One afternoon, by chance, he met an old school friend, a man he had lost contact with for years. His friend, now a successful businessman, listened to Femi's story quietly. Without judgment, he offered him advice and help to start a bigger business. Femi worked hard, giving everything he had. Every morning, he woke early, working harder than he ever had, and with hope came wealth. Within a year, Femi had grown from a humble trader to a multi-millionaire businessman. And in that same year, he met Ada, a kind and gentle woman who admired his strength and heart. They married quietly, surrounded by people who respected the journey he had endured. Femi's life had changed completely, but Sandra remained unaware. In her mind, he was still the poor market man. She flaunted her life with Toby, thinking she was victorious. Femi's fortunes quietly multiplied. She could not see the winds of change that had been silently lifting him to a life she could never imagine. Sandra and Toby fixed their wedding dates, and she and her friends decided to send Femi a wedding invitation just to humiliate him. When Femi received it, he was reluctant to attend, but his wife Ada convinced him to go so she can see he was no longer the man she had left. The day of Sandra's wedding finally came. Everything was big, beautiful, and full of decorations, just as she had always wanted. Flowers were everywhere, ribbons hung from the wall, and music played softly as guests arrived. Sandra looked perfect. Her nails were long and shiny, her hair was neat, and her perfume made the hair smell sweet. Everyone admired her beauty and said she looked like a queen. She felt proud, thinking she made the right decision leaving Femi to have a better life with Toby. But then, something unexpected happened. A shiny black Range Rover drove slowly towards the wedding hall. People turned to look. Some whispered, some gasped. Then Femi stepped out. He looked strong, calm, and very different from the poor marketman Sandra had left behind. He wore a clean smart suit that looked so good on him. Beside him was Ada, his new wife, who looked kind, gentle, and just as beautiful as Sandra. Sandra could not believe her eyes. The man she had left, the man who she thought was too poor, now looked rich. The guests watched quietly, sensing something had changed, but Sandra could only stare at Femi. He walked with confidence, smiling gently, showing no anger. She realized in that moment how much she had lost. She looked at Toby, hoping he would make her feel strong, but he was busy with the wedding, unaware of her fears. Sandra felt bad as her pride was crumbled. She had left a man who loved her for someone flashy, and now she could see the real cost. Femi and Ada walked past her, smiling at everyone. Sandra's excitement for her own wedding began to fade. She had thought she had won, but now she saw the truth that some things like love, patience, and loyalty could never be bought. Even though she smiled and danced with Toby, deep inside she felt a sharp sting of regret. She would never forget the sight of Femi, happy and successful, while she had chosen greed over love. After the wedding, Sandra thought her life with Toby would be perfect. At first, he gave her gifts. He took her to nice places and made her feel special. She felt proud for leaving Femi and believed she had finally won. But soon, things began to change. Toby started showing his true self. He became mean, selfish, and careless. He no longer treated Sandra with kindness. He shouted at her for small mistakes, ignored her feelings, and even started spending time with other women. Within a few months, Toby married two other women, leaving Sandra to feel trapped and ashamed. She realized too late that the man she had chosen was not kind, loving, or loyal. The life she had dreamt of was empty and full of pain. Sandra's thoughts often returned to Femi. She remembered how he had worked hard, loved her, and cared for her every day. She remembered the long nights he spent worrying about her happiness, the small gifts he gave, and the patience he had shown. Filled with regrets, Sandra went to Femi, hoping for forgiveness. But she was too proud and too ashamed to leave Toby. She stayed with him, living with guilt, sadness, and the weight of her choices. Meanwhile, Femi's life continued to shine. He had built a successful business, and with Ada by his side, he was so happy. He lived with peace and joy, and he never sought revenge, but his success and joy were quiet answers to all the wrongs he had endured. Sandra learned the hardest lesson of her life. Wealth, gifts, and attention cannot replace true love. Loyalty and patience are the important things in marriage. She understood that greed and pride had cost her a man who truly loved her, and no amount of regret could ever bring him back. And so, she lived with the guilt forever. The lesson to be learned from this story is that true love and hard work are always rewarded, even when others fail to appreciate them. Love cannot be bought with money or gifts. Greed and pride can destroy relationships and happiness. True character and hard work are always rewarded. It is better to appreciate what you have than to chase empty dreams. Thank you so much, guys, for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so when next I post a new video, you will be updated. See you next time. Bye.